you ready for an entertainment experience of a lifetime? Knockdown, drag-out, hard-hitting conversations, debates, and interviews. Well, if you said yes to any of these questions, sit back, relax, and enjoy something like no other. This is the Isolation Series podcast, presented by wellbeingsperformance.com for all your online meeting needs, and by imprintpilates.com Toronto and the Greater Toronto Area's premier Pilates studio, also specializing in rehabilitation and athletic conditioning, and finally by greenstorage.ca Toronto and the Greater Toronto Area's #1 self-storage facility. Here now is your host, Spencer Miller.
Hey guys, and welcome to another edition of the Isolation Series. Me, Spencer Miller, very pleased to be joined by a good friend of mine today, and my guest today. He is currently starring at the Imperial Theater on Broadway as the last living temptation himself, Otis Williams. And of course, I am referring to the one and only Nik Walks himself, Nik Walker. Welcome to the Isolation Series for the very first time, my friend.
Thank you so much. And thank you for that amazing intro. That's probably the best intro I have ever gotten and ever will get. So I appreciate it. It's very kind of you.
Absolutely. Let's jump right in. I want to get your thoughts first and foremost. Ain't Too Proud, The Life and Times of the Temptations had their reopening night 2 weeks ago tomorrow on October the 15th, I believe it was. After so many months off, like many shows due to the pandemic and things like that. My question to you is, going back into that reopening night, was the energy unlike anything you have ever experienced in any previous show, just because of the sheer joy and anticipation that went behind it?
Yes, it was a really amazing amazing night. And I think just like you're saying, right, there's so much that went into this, and you have to understand, I joined the show in February of 2020. February 28th of 2020, I remember the exact date. And then all of a sudden the pandemic starts, right? And we're all in our homes, we're all locked in. So I've barely kind of gotten my hands on this thing. And hold on one second, because my cat is trying to get up in my lap. So he's gonna join us for a second.
Yes.
It's okay. There you go. So yeah, like this pandemic strikes, and we're all out for the count, and then we're battling this thing. We're trying to figure out how to live around this thing. And then there's also a social uprising in the country, in the United States, and all these things, and around the world, right? And all these things are happening. So especially with this cast, which is bluntly an all black cast, with the exception of 2 cast members, right? Like, this is a group of people who have been through a lot this past year and a half, and so the work to get back to the stage was not just work of rehearsing the show, but was also work of creating a safer work environment, having honest conversations with our producers, our designers, our creative team, just about what behaviors and what practices could no longer stand, trying to make the most inclusive building possible. So, when people in the audiences came for opening night, it was an energy unlike anything I experienced, not just because of the excitement in the house, but because of how hard we'd worked to get on stage. This is a group of people who have really earned their reopening, have really dug deep for their reopening, and that excitement and relief and readiness to start a new journey was all there on our opening night.
So let me ask you this also, because it's a unique perspective. You get to play the track of the last remaining living temptation, and that comes with a lot of weight. So again, on reopening night and leading up to reopening night, with Dominique and Sergio, and all the rest of that, I'm sure Otis was in there as well, making sure that you guys were good and stuff like that. But what was it like knowing that, hey, yeah, we're doing this reopening, but Otis is there, the gentleman that got nominated for a Tony before me is there, and Derek Baskin, Ephraim Sykes is there, Jeremy Pope is there. You had quite the group supporting you in the reopening. But what did that add to the atmosphere, and what did that add to you specifically?
Well, it's, you mentioned Derek and Ephraim specifically. I mean, what's funny about that is you have to understand that, if you are lucky enough to have a career in the theater industry, in the New York theater industry, um, it's a very small community, right? So, Derek Baskin, obviously legendary actor, Ephraim Sykes, man who, needs no introduction, who is, has a star and is a star that continues to rise. But these are also my friends. I mean, I when I think of Ephraim Sykes and Derek Baskin, I think of the bachelor party that we were all at when the band picked us up on 46th Street, and wildness ensued. But I think that that's kind of what was so special. Was it wasn't pressure knowing that they were there as much as it was, oh, that's family, right? These are people that I know and that have had my back in the darkest times. When I first joined the company, that was kind of one of the, I think, the really, and I'll credit him to this day, the only way I survived doing this role was that, Derek was so open with how to navigate it, because just logistically, yes, you have the weight of playing Otis Williams, who is this, again, this legend, but you also, this is a very technically hard role. You never stop talking, you never leave the stage, you sing in every number, you dance in every number. So how do you navigate that? And Derek, gave me, like, really, I mean, it should be a book, it should be a guidebook that you pass down to every Otis, right? To let you know, like, hey, down to like, here's how much water you should drink by this time of the day, and here's when your last pee break is before the show starts, like that kind of stuff. Because it really, once the show goes, you're going. So it was so lovely seeing them there, because it was like, oh yeah, this is, we all built this together. This reopening was built on the shoulders of Ephraim and Jeremy and Derek and Sergio and Dominique. And it really doesn't stand without them, even though they're not on stage doing it.
And I assume that it really lends itself well to still have people like Lord Harkness, James Harkness, and Jawan Jackson, and some of the people that were part of the original cast still in their original roles, to help also navigate you guys through the beginning parts of you getting your grasp of the role, like you said earlier on.
Yeah, you mentioned James Lord Harkness, and that is his name, Lord Harkness, uh, whether he wants it or not. Um, I think James, I think, is such a custodian of the movement of the show. He really just knows, similar to his character Paul, who is, in many ways the choreographer of the Temptations. Um, James really has this choreography in his bones. So often, if we're not going to Sergio, then we're going to one of three people. It's either Edgar, who's the associate choreographer, Esther, who is the associate or the assistant choreographer and the dance captain, and James. James, even though he's in the company, like, I'll pull him aside and be like, hey, teach me this. Because that's the other thing. P.S. I cannot dance. And this show, I cannot dance. I get paid to pretend I can dance. And this show is a very heavy dance show. So I have a lot of questions as somebody who's really I'm just trained as an actor. I'm not trained as a dancer. And James is always there with an answer. So that's great. And then Jawan, again, Jawan and I, we've been doing shows together for 10 years. So it really, yes, it helps in terms of like finding the groove of the show, but it's also just like, that's my friend. It's very easy to play best friends with Jawan because he is one of my closest friends. And who I've had since I was in my early 20s. So it really is, definitely makes it easier.
We touched on it a little bit just a moment ago, and I want to dive a little deeper into it now if we can. You were fortunate enough to originate the role of Aaron Burr in a small, tiny show that only a few people have heard of. Something, Hamilton, I believe the name is. Yeah,
The Hamilton thing, the
yeah,
skits. Yes,
yes,
yes.
yes. Something tells me that that show is going to have a little bit of a future. But yeah,
They say.
yeah, you were fortunate enough to originate the role of Aaron Burr that Leslie Odom Jr. was able to originate in the original Broadway company alongside Lin Manuel Miranda and the great company that was the original cast. I want to talk about the stark contrast between those two tracks in terms of the fact that even though there's a lot of singing and rapping, quote unquote, in Hamilton and different things like that, you mentioned it earlier, playing the track of Otis, you don't ever really leave the stage. At least when you're Aaron Burr, you get to like go off stage for a costume change or this or a sip of water over here for like a minute or a minute and a half, whatever. With Otis, you don't really get to do that outside of like a 10-second costume change to when you're running off to like put your white blazer on for Can't Get Next to You or something like that. So
Yeah.
why don't you talk about the stark contrast between those two? Because like you said, it's using two different muscle memories in this particular case.
It's so funny because I think what surprised me, coming off of Hamilton and into Proud was the similarities between Otis and Burr. Right. They're both, I think what's, from an actor's perspective, and this is going to be really nerdy and technical, so please forgive me, but I'm a nerd. Um, right. The layman would say, like, right, they're the narrators of the show. And for me, that's not true in both cases. Both, I think that anytime you have somebody who is taking you through the journey of a play, I think the question becomes, why are they doing that for the actor, right? The audience, you could never know that any of this is my process and be just as happy seeing the show. But for me, who's the actor playing these characters, I'm asking, why are you telling me this information? Why is this what you've chosen to do with your 2 hours of time? And, I think that what's interesting is at the heart of it, both of these men have questions about choices they've made in their lives, right? For Otis, the question is, you know, it- was building this group worth it if it caused so much pain? And quite frankly, so much death, right? None of these, as you said, Otis is the only person who survived the creation of this group. These men died largely because of behaviors and traumas that they got performing in this group and changing the music game.
Absolutely.
Um, go ahead.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you agree with me or not, but, and for those of you watching and listening, I don't mean to spoil a little bit of the end here for you, but one of the most profound moments for me is that when your character of Otis and the character of Otis is standing there right before the finale and says, to date, there have been 24 temptations and everything, like the fact that Otis was able to get through all of that death and that trial and tribulation and trauma and still keep pushing forward and still keep making sure that the music that these five original people created was heard for decades and decades and decades. That to me is so profound.
Yes, it's incredibly profound, and especially when you consider what he said before, which is, folks sometimes ask me which temptation I bring back to life. None. I'd bring back my son. Right? Spoiler alert. Like, he loses his son, and he was an absentee father. Right? He wasn't there for his son, and that is a scar that he carries with him. And it makes the question of whether this was worth it or not very tricky. I think it's a yes, but I think it's a yes with a caveat. And similarly to Burr, I think Burr is not a narrator. Burr is a man with a question. Burr's question is, how did you accomplish it? It's the first question he asks in the show, right? The opening lyric is not a statement, it's a question. How does a bastard orphan son of a whore and a Scotsman dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot in the Caribbean by providence, impoverished and squalor grow up to be a hero and a scholar? That's a question. And I'm of the school of thought that if a character asks a question, it's not rhetorical. They want the answer. And So Burr is taking you on a 2.5 hour journey to figure out the answer. How did he do this? And why couldn't I do this? Right? What's the difference between the two men? And, you know, debate, depending on who is playing him, you'll find a different answer to that question. But I think that for me, the biggest difference I would say between Otis and Burr, Otis is on a journey, I think, towards something, towards a healing. I think that if you were just to look at, like, just to, look at Otis's journey in this play, he very much had, he's starting the play with a lot of regret, and he ends the play with a lot of regret, but he's at least able to balance them out to a place where it's like, the next steps are going to be hard and I'm going to miss the hell out of my brothers, but we still created something beautiful. Whereas Burr, I think the answer to his question, right, is that it didn't have to be one or the other. He did this because of who he was, but that didn't have to negate who you were. The world is wide enough for both of us.
Yeah.
And you find that out too late. So I think that ultimately Otis starts at regret and finds healing, and Burr starts at a place of questioning but finds regret.
Right.
And I think that is but it's funny. Again, I am just, if not a little more exhausted playing Otis at the end of the day than I was ever playing Burr. And that's not just physically. It's just, I hate when actors are always like, oh my God, my job is so hard. And it's because it's a hard job, but like, it's also, we are getting paid thousands of dollars to play pretend. So like, it is super fun, but it's very tiring to live in that kind of skin for a long time. And
on that
yeah.
note, though, you're absolutely correct. You and I have been in entertainment in one form or another for a long time, and we make no apologies about how difficult it is being on a movie set or a television set or a live theater stage or whatever the case may be. But would you agree, more so now than ever before, at least for the immediate future, that actors as a whole are going to push most of that aside in terms of the fact that everybody is just so grateful to be back doing what they initially loved to do because it was taken away for so long? Yes, it is still going to be a grind of 8 shows a week and different things like that. But for the immediate future, at least in my opinion, and correct me if I'm wrong in your opinion, but I think the sheer abundance of gratitude and gratefulness to be back doing what was taken away from us for so long will overshadow the exhaustion.
I think that is I think that there's certainly cases where that is true. I think that, here's what I'll say, bottom line, I think there's going to be no better time to see a Broadway show than the next 3 months. I think that these performances that you're going to get in these next 3 months when people are first back are so passionate and so rested. First of all, right? They've had a little while to reset, but just so, exactly like you're saying, grateful. But I do want to make the one just nuance that I think grateful doesn't negate the discovery of self-worth. And I think that that's something, right? I think that for so long, the consensus has been, well, just be grateful because you are in this elite, group of people, would be, you're an actor, you're a crew member, or you're a director, like whatever, who are creating this high level of art. And we are extremely grateful. But I think that, again, one of the things that's come out of the pandemic is understanding, like, yeah, but there is something to rest, and there is something to attention paid to mental health, and there is something to attention paid to emotional health. And it used to be that, like, if you are at a place where this perfect example, I'm a perfectionist. I love to push myself past the bounds of reason to get a good moment. If I haven't gotten the moment, can we go back? Can we try that again? I need to get it. And that used to drive me insane. That used to really put a lot of undue pressure on me. This time around, when we were in the rehearsal process, if I felt my brain getting a little stuffed, I'd be like, hey, I actually need 5 minutes. No matter where we were at, didn't matter who was in the room. I don't care if producers were in the room. I need 5 minutes. I just need a minute to just get my brain right. Which, again, I think that all I'm saying is I think that why the gratefulness is there is because there actually are, in a lot of cases, clearer boundaries now. I think a lot of actors and a lot of artists over this pandemic have been like, I really want to reevaluate my self-worth and how I allow my self-worth to show up in the rehearsal room. And so if something is making me uncomfortable, I can raise my hand and say, I need to take a second. And there's nothing wrong with that, and not judging that, and not being shamed for that. And so I think with those boundaries in place, yes, you will see a lot more. You see a lot of very grateful actors, not only grateful because they have their jobs back, but also grateful because they are feeling safe in their work environment. And that's very important.
Okay, so we'll get you out of here on these last couple things. Number one, what is it that Nik Walker wants to accomplish for himself? Not for anybody else, but just for yourself, looking back at the next 5 years. Like we talked about, you've been very fortunate to play Aaron Burr in the juggernaut that is Hamilton, and you were able to leave that and now go and play the legend that is Otis Williams in Ain't Too Proud, The Life and Times of the Temptations. But what do you want to accomplish within the next 5 years where you can look back more so than you already do and say, fuck, I accomplished pretty much everything that I wanted to accomplish, and I feel good about it now.
The first place my mind goes, if you're talking career, it's my writing. I write every day. I write plays, I write screenplays, and only recently have started to really sell them and pitch them and see where that takes me. And I don't ever want to give up acting. But I have a lot of stories to tell. Richard, actually, Richard Blake, the man who, put us together, who's an asshole. And Richard, if you're listening, you're always going to be an asshole and no one will ever love you. He is very much somebody who taught me the value of telling a story. I learned a lot about storytelling from Richard.
And I don't like to give him credit ever, just like you don't, because as we said, he's an asshole, and he will always be an asshole to us that we love nonetheless. But Richard and I, along with another colleague by the name of Joe Ricci, who you might have met.
Oh, that's like, oh yeah, now you're talking about family.
Yes, yeah. So Joe, Richard, and I are in the process of creating a one-man show about my career and my life called "Oh Right, I Can't Walk." So that is hopefully going to come to fruition in the spring. But yes, I totally understand what you're talking about there, because Richard and I have been talking about that forever, and he's like, we need to do this, and here we are on the precipice of doing it.
I love it. And that's the thing. Like, he really is. He understands stories so well. And Joe's a genius. And so I just getting my stories off the ground. That's definitely a thing. And other than that, I think just enjoying my life. Like I said, I'm a very hard worker. And I don't take enough time to kind of stop and breathe. And I really just want to take more moments to stop and breathe. If that makes sense. So yeah.
Right. Okay. Now you mentioned it briefly, but we're going to revisit it right now. And that is, much like me, you are a self-proclaimed nerd when it comes to a lot of things. So I don't feel bad opening up the jar of nerdicism for a moment here on the Isolation series, and ask you this. What are your thoughts on the upcoming revamp of the Batman story with Robert Pattinson? And specifically, are you as excited as I am to see Spider-Man No Way Home with all the multiverse coming together? Because, to be honest, my nerd level went through the roof when I saw both of those trailers, and Paul Dano and Colin Farrell playing the Penguin and the Riddler respectively.
Yeah, let me show you. So right on my shelf, my nerd shelf, which is behind me, which you can't see, is my favorite comic book series, Gotham Central. If you haven't read this comic book series, it's truly the best. And when I saw the trailer for the new Batman, that's the first thing I thought was kind of this mix of Gotham Central and Batman Year One. If you ever read that comic, it's an amazing comic. And that's Matt Reeves, who is directing, and I think either co-scripted or scripted the new Batman, talks about how Batman Year One was a major influence. I'm so excited. I'm always excited when there's a new Batman, because Batman to me is he is the perfect superhero. And I say that he is a superhero. Everyone's going to try to be like, but he doesn't have any superpowers. I don't care. He's a superhero. He's incredibly intelligent. His intelligence is his superpower. And his problem solving skills. I'm so excited. I think Robert Pattinson's going to be great. Colin Farrell, I'm super excited to see him as the Penguin. I think Paul Dano is going to make a really interesting Riddler. There's so many possibilities. And in terms of
one thing that I'm also very excited about is nobody really talks about the fact that one of the greatest chameleons as far as acting in our time, in my opinion, Andy Serkis.
Jeffrey Wright?
No,
Andy Serkis.
Andy Serkis is going to play Alfred in this revamp. Yeah. And I believe that he is going to knock it out of the park as well, because whether it is Gollum, whether it is Caesar, whether it is directing the new Venom, or whatever he does, he just seems to keep reinventing himself.
He's genius. And him and Matt Reeves have, the fruit that they have borne in the past has been nothing but excellent. So I can't wait. I cannot wait for that. And then in terms of Spider-Man No Way Home, I think that we're seeing now, certainly in Venom, spoiler alert, but also, we saw it in the Morbius trailer. Sony is opening up their universe into the MCU. Loki obviously had so many implications towards that as well. So it's just going to be an exciting time. I really, it's so funny because these are the stories that I grew up with as a kid and, got bullied for reading them. And now everyone loves them, And I think that that's such a beautiful kind of like, not comeuppance, but just like karmic circle. Like, oh yeah, see, now you're coming to me and asking me these questions because now the movies are out and I know these answers now and I might not tell you, but beyond that, it's just so wonderful to see these characters up on the screen. Tom Holland is a brilliant Spider-Man. It's gonna be brilliant.
Speaking of that, why do you think they sort of swung and missed necessarily with Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield? Now, having said that, let me make a caveat and say that I still enjoy the original 2002 Tobey Maguire Spider-Man just because it was the first one of its kind that come out, and Willem Dafoe as his name is
Green Goblin. Norman Osborn.
Green Goblin, and so on and so forth. That was great. I mean, it was campy and cheesy, but why do you think they necessarily swung and missed with those particular individuals? But when they happened to cast Tom Holland, they finally hit lightning in a bottle with the Spider-Man franchise.
See, it's funny. I'm gonna say I don't think it was the individuals they cast. I think that both Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield were great. It didn't ride or die on them. I think, and I also want to say that Spider-Man 2, right, the sequel to the Sam Raimi's first Spider-Man, I consider it one of the greatest superhero movies of all time. Certainly top 5, definitely right up there with The Dark Knight and Superman and Avengers Endgame, Civil War. But I think that when it came to those franchises, I think I'll start with Andrew Garfield's with the Amazing Spider-Man franchise. I think that they were coming off of The Dark Knight, right? It was 2011 or 12. Everything was dark and gritty. And Spider-Man, like, it's not that he can't be, but I think that Spider-Man, he's the Mickey Mouse of Marvel, right? Like, which is so funny that Disney owns Marvel now. He is their mascot. Like, he is the beating heart. And so much of that is about him being a kid, being a youthful kid who makes mistakes, who isn't perfect, who isn't fully formed. And I think that they lost that with The Amazing Spider-Man. I think they really tried to dig into, like, this is the new gritty Spider-Man. And it's like, well, that's fine. But like, you can't just, the grit that The Dark Knight had was because that was the world Christopher Nolan specifically created. He didn't just throw grit on it and call it a movie. He really, made decisions about this world. And I think Amazing Spider-Man just kind of made some generalizations. As for the Sam Raimi trilogy, again, I love number one. I love number two. I think number three just went off the rails. I think, again, who knows what was going on behind the scenes at that thing, but it just all of a sudden felt like a parody of itself. As you said, campy, really campy. And that can be a little too much too. But I think that, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse got it perfectly. Right. It has the fun. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but it's also a little dark. Right. It's a blend of things. And I think that at the end of the day, with any superhero movie, with any genre movie in general, the only thing that you need to worry about is just telling a good, simple story. If you can just tell a good story, everything else will fall into place. The actors will fall into place, the design will fall into place, but your story has to be coherent. It all starts with the story. And I think that is something that Marvel has been able to do really well these past couple of years, which is why we're seeing an entire multiverse now. So very excited for the new.
Now, I would be remiss if I did not bring my partner in crime and co-host in for a little bit of this part of the conversation, because I know you're chomping at the bit to open your nerdicism there, Paul, a little bit. So would you like to talk to Nik about anything in particular that we are talking about right now?
Thanks, Spence, and thanks, Nik, for being on the show. I actually have a question about, you've played now two iconic roles with two very, supportive and rabid fan bases. And I'm just curious about some of the interaction and how it feels, and the pressure that, the positive pressure that puts on an actor to have such iconic roles and such iconic, plays and with a group like the Temptations.
It's so funny. First of all, it's so nice to meet you over the virtual space, in the Zoom world. It's funny because I think that one of the things I love, especially, I'll start with the Hamilton fans. The Hamilton fans are, I've never met any fans like the Hamilton fans. They are so loyal and so kind, and they really just accept you for who you are, right? Because so I'm coming in, you said I originated the Philip tour, the Philip company of Hamilton. And at this point, the show's been going for 2 years. I was on the Broadway company before that. I joined right as Leslie and Lynn were leaving. And, Leslie's performance, as you said, it's iconic, right? People know it. And when I got offered a chance to play Burr, there was no world in which I was ever going to be Leslie, ever. I'm not Leslie. I'm at least a head taller than Leslie. That's not a knock on Leslie, it's just the truth. But I think that very quickly you realize that you're not going to do a Leslie impression, and they're not looking for a Leslie impression. And anyone who is, go watch Disney Plus. So I think that one of the things that I was so relieved by was the fact that they made space for me, the fan base, to just kind of find my own Burr and do my own thing. I have not looked at the Reddit, the Reddit reviews. I have at this point seen the Hamilton, the actual reviews in newspapers and stuff, and they were very kind. But the fans to this day, I'm a huge cereal person. I'm a huge whiskey person. The Hamilton fans have sent me at least $500 worth of cereal to my dressing room, and whiskey. They are there, and they write me notes, and they just treat me with such kindness. So I will never not be thankful to them. And there are many shows and performances where you talk about the positive pressure. It was never pressure, but certainly knowing that they were out there was like, okay, I know you're tired. We got to make something happen tonight. Let's figure it out. So that was beautiful. And then with the Temptations, I think one of the things that is so beautiful about this show is that there are people, right? Hamilton is a story that happened, 200-300 years ago. But with the Temptations, there are people who grew up with these guys, meaning they were teenagers when the Temps were teenagers, and they remember this music and they remember these stories. And so you come to Ain't Too Proud, and I think that it's this wonderful introduction to a culture because, right, there are people talking back to the characters in the audience, just like, oh, come on, David, don't do that. Like, you mean like, because these were their friends. They had their posters on their walls, and they feel connected to these characters and this story of innovation. So it really makes you happy when like, I love a vocal audience. I love an audience who is with you and feels free to interact with you. Especially with my character being the one who breaks the fourth wall. Like, the first line of the show, somebody's always like responding, and that sets the tone for the rest of the show. That lets them know, like, anybody who's not aware, oh yeah, you can talk to me and I can hear you and we can have a conversation. And
so on that same note, like, you started on February 28th and then you guys went dark on March the 12th, or in and around March the 12th, if I remember correctly. So you only got to play the track essentially for 2 weeks before it was taken away from you for a year and a half. So my question to you is, in the 2 weeks since you reopened the show, do you have a moment that sticks out to you already where an audience member either said something to you or something like that, and it just kind of like piqued your ear a little bit and you kind of smirked to yourself, or whatever the case may be?
I love, you talked about the ending, right? The finale of the show. And you have to understand, so Des McAnuff, who directed this piece, Des was believe it or not, my college best friend's godfather. So I've known Des for over 15, maybe 16 years. And he was one of the first, but he gave me the start to my career. I did a show with him out at La Jolla. Played one of his leads out there. And he kept hiring me and bringing me back. So we've really, me and him have a very good shorthand when it comes to, digging into character. And one of the things that we knew we wanted to try with me in this role was, really not letting up the gas on the ending. That it's not easy for Otis at the end of this play to reconcile the loss of his four friends. That Brokenhearted isn't a song that he sings it and all of a sudden it's happy again. That it really is can I let go of you? What becomes of the brokenhearted? Again, it's a question. And one of the things I love in these past 2 weeks is seeing the audience, right? They're crying. They're just crying. When they're with you, they're nodding with you. They know what it is. Everyone at this point, especially the past 2 years, everyone knows what it is to mourn. And that's what that song is. And so looking out there as I speak these words and seeing them with me is very special. The other thing I will say that I think is so on a lighter note, that's not audience related about Ain't Too Proud, is the amount, the speed at which you drop weight doing the show. My pants already don't fit. They are already too big. And that happened at the 2 week mark last time as well. Like, when I say that inches disappear, like, it's actually insane, the amount of cardio that is done in this show. I really don't have to, I used to, go to the gym, 4 or 5 times a week. And now I'm down to 3 because I just don't need it. It's the show. My show is a 2-hour hit session. So that is kind of something that I laughed at. We were laughing at with the wardrobe department, like, oh yeah, it's 2 weeks again because you are missing an inch off your body. So that is a nice perk to come back to, for sure.
Have you ever had somebody in the time that you've been playing the track yell back something interesting to you when you start the show with you got a smile so bright, you should have been a candle? You didn't expect it to be a #1 hit with lyrics like that, or however the line goes.
Yeah.
To me, that's a really hilarious line to start.
Well, it starts even before that. It starts with the way you do things you do. Remember that? Somebody always says, yeah. Right? That's the first line. They're always like, oh yeah, I remember that. and then we laugh about it, right? Yeah. Okay, you know, our first song on the charts, right? It's a welcome. And Dominique as a writer is so good with that, right? She really doesn't, you know, you have to understand, and I know you guys understand, writers choose their words so carefully, right? You don't just throw things out there. Every single word counts. So Dominique's starting this show, the first spoken words of this show as a question is no mistake. It's an invitation to the audience, be like, hey, come on, talk. We're here, you know, and that invitation carries throughout. So yeah, there have been so many moments people have said, yeah, people have, yelled at David Ruffin, you know, about how attractive they think he is. It gets wild.
Matt is an attractive man. I'll give him that.
He is an attractive man. Matt is an attractive man. Yes. He's also what I love about Matt is he's a baby too. So he's very new to all this attention, and it's very funny to watch him navigate it. And just be like, oh my God, they're looking at it. It's like, yes, Matt, they're looking at you. You just did a split on the stage in silver pants. There's not much else to look at.
The $1 million question then becomes this: out of all of your numbers and the fact that you're on that stage for 2 hours and 28 minutes of 2 hours and 32 minutes of a show, what is the most difficult number or transition for Nik Walker to deal with on a night by night basis?
Shout, easily. 100%. It is shout. Shout is the hardest. Shout is actually, to me, harder than Cloud 9. And Cloud 9 would be most people's answer. Cloud 9 happens at the end of the show, and it's a very, very big number. A lot of just crazy movement. And you have to really pay. For me, I'm like in the movement, and then I have a monologue, and then I'm in the movement, and I have a monologue. So let's pace it out. But Shout is just so athletic. It's like right at the top of the show. And truly for me, if as soon as I get through Shout, I'm like, great, hard part's over. I'm never more exhausted than when I'm finished with Shout. And I've like one of the first lines of the next scene too. So it's so unfair. It's just like, we'll do whatever it takes to make a hit. Like I'm like breathing my face off. So yeah, Shout is certainly, I don't know. I think it's just because it's so much jumping. I think that's probably part of it. It's like doing like burpees and in like high knees. It's very intense. But yeah, Shout easily.
Good. Well, Nik, we have a lot of different people from a lot of different disciplines come on the Isolation series with us. I'm very pleased and proud to call you a friend of mine moving forward. And I look forward to having you back on with us in the not too distant future around holiday time, because both the Spider-Man and Batman movies, respectively, are coming out right around Christmas time. So it would be appropriate to have Nik Walker come back on the Isolation series and debrief with us once we get a chance to watch it. What do you think about them apples, my friend?
Oh, I think those are great apples, and I will buy those apples and I'll eat those apples. They're excellent. And yeah, man, you just let me know. And thank you for tracking me down this time. It's reopening is a crazy time that I don't think any of us prepared for, with how much it would take of our time. But I'm so happy that I got to be on here and talk with you fine people. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Stay right there. But that is the very multi-talented Nik Walker, who plays Otis Williams 8 times a week, currently at the Imperial Theater on Broadway. Make sure you go and check him out. You will not be sorry, and if you are, you can blame me. But on behalf of Nik and Paul, I'm the better looking one out of the three of us, always, Spence. And this has been another edition of the Isolation series. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you all again on Monday. Bye-bye. Hey guys, thanks once again for tuning in to today's episode of the Isolation series with me, Spencer Miller, and that guy right over there, Paul Shields. As always, today's show has been brought to you by wellbeingsperformance.com for all your virtual meeting and virtual meet period. Please go to wellbeingsperformance.com, as well as Barbarian Steakhouse, Toronto and the Greater Toronto Area's premier steakhouse facility since 1959. For more information, including any new updates on their menu, please go to barbarians.com, as well as imprintpilates.com. Toronto's premier Pilates studio, and greenstorage.ca, Toronto and the Greater Toronto Area's #1 self-storage facility. For more information, please go to greenstorage.ca. And Paul, please tell people all about some more whole grain goodness that is us.
Folks, be sure to check us out on podbean.com by going to theisolationseries.podbean.com. There you'll find the audio-only versions of the podcast, including all of our past amazing interviews. One more time, that's theisolationseries.podbean.com. And hey, don't forget to follow us on Instagram. It's at @VSpencerMiller and at Pauly Shields, Pauly spelled Pawly. So find us on podbean.com, follow us on Instagram, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Special shout outs to our newest partner in crime on the Isolation series, and that is the Toronto Immune and Digestive Health Institute. For more information, please go to TIHDI.ca, and they can take care of all of your needs, from IVs to scopes and everything in between. Mark Silverberg and his team will treat you with spectacular respect and knowledge. That is the Toronto Immune Health and Digestive Institute.ca. You do not want to miss it. And once again, everybody, thank you for watching and or listening and supporting this thing we like to call the Isolation series. For Paul Shields, I am Spencer Miller, and we will see you again very, very soon.